Records reveal some of the calls made to the Washington Attorney General's office's bias incident hate crimes hotline, all around alleged Somali daycare fraud. And the calls show both sides of the controversy. Joining us to discuss this further is the Center Square investigative reporter, TJ Martinell. TJ, thanks for taking time with us today. Fascinating to be able to get access to some of these particular hotline tips, I guess we can call them. But what were you finding when you were pouring through some of this information? And were you able to get the actual audio recordings?
No, I think a lot of these were not actual phone calls. I think what they were was there's like an online form that you can send out. I saw a lot of them that I couldn't print. They were not fit to print. A lot of people were angry with the way that this whole thing has been handled in our state. Starting out from, December when there was, reports of alleged daycare fraud, and the Attorney General's office put out a statement basically saying that people should not be going up to these homes, and that the people who run these daycares should be reporting these incidents to the hotline, but also to law enforcement. And it's important to note that this it's a bias incident and hate crime hotline. Hate crime is a legal status in Washington state. Bias incident is not. It's just somebody got offended or something like that. So this hotline is for people to report non-criminal activity. And I think that that's what is a bit unsettling for anybody who's, in favor of the First Amendment, which would be many forms of speech would count as a bias incident in that case. So you have people who are going up to these daycares. We've had our Center Square reporters have gone up to just make inquiries into whether or not they're an actual daycare. And there's been a lot of controversy from not just the Attorney General's office, but lawmakers who have, said they're in a position where they can't legally do anything about it, but they have raised protests and criticized that. And so I think what we're seeing in Washington state is this weird blurring of treating non-criminal activity as if it was criminal, but not actually implementing policies that you would if somebody actually committed a crime. And I think that confuses people, especially people who are not from this country, they're from another country where the First Amendment doesn't exist. So, but like I said, there was a lot of messages sent to the Attorney General's office that we just could not print. There was a lot of anger.
I imagine so. I mean, you've got to think, though, last year, a lot of the concerns about fraud seemed to boil over, not just in Washington state where, the Center Square reporters were looking into this themselves, but elsewhere throughout the country.
Right.
Stories about daycare saying, hey, we've got X number of kids. And then you go to that daycare and you find out, well, there's no kids there. What's happening? And when that's reported out, be it an independent YouTuber or a corporate, news organization, it's still, free speech and the right of the free press to report these things. Obviously, you had a reaction of people going out on the streets and doing their own reporting here.
Right.
So talk a bit about what we were finding in some of these transcripts, in some of these messages of people from daycares actually raising concern.
Yeah, they had people. I mean, I don't know if they didn't mention our names at all, any reporters from the Center Square, but they were reporting people showing up and asking questions and wanting to take photos or do, record videos and things like that. And so I think the issue is if they think that a crime's been committed, then they need to contact law enforcement. The Attorney General's office, it would seem like, is not the appropriate place to go with that kind of thing. And I get the Attorney General's office did say that, but that was in response to people going to alleged daycares and finding that there's no people there or no children there. And what's interesting is I wrote a separate story. I got an email that was sent by a former federal agency manager for a childcare program in the federal government program. And he sent this email to someone at the Attorney General's office of our state saying that childcare fraud is common. And I just thought that was so, and this was sent out during the whole controversy when it was erupting in December. So you have a former federal regional manager for a childcare, program saying that fraud is common. And meanwhile, you have all these people coming out, and including the Attorney General's office, where instead of saying we're going to investigate, and I'm not sure if they have the authority to do so, there might be others, but at the very least, they could call on the appropriate authorities to look into this. But you really didn't hear that. And we've already, our reporters have interviewed our state auditor, who has no plans to investigate childcare fraud. There's the DSHS fraud division that could be investigating. We don't know. We do know that the state auditor released an audit saying that there was a lack of oversight over how these funds were being distributed, but that's not the same with fraud. And so, and I'm saying that they haven't found fraud. It's creating kind of a bit of chaos, because there's a confusion over how people should be responding. And then you have people who have concerns about fraud as taxpayers. And I think what we saw in a lot of these messages to the Attorney General's office's hotline is they feel like these allegations are not being taken seriously. And there's a very strong opinion among many that fraud is going on. And the reason why it's not being uncovered is because the people who should be investigating it aren't doing what they should be doing.
TJ, one call that was from a suspected child care facility here has this to say: a masked individual with a camera and a microphone came to my child care facility demanding paperwork to enroll a child. I informed him we are at capacity and offered to place him on a wait list. He identified himself as a YouTuber attempting to record proof that his daycare was fraudulent. They denied entry with recording equipment due to minors being present and directed him to the website. That's just one side of this, right? And as you've kind of highlighted here, something else you found going through all of these different transcripts of messages to the Washington Attorney General's office were people saying, hey, there's fraud happening. Why aren't you looking into this? Why are you diverting away and instead seeming to villainize journalists? Here's one message that I'll read partially here, that they have to report Attorney General Nick Brown and the governor of Washington and Secretary of State for threats against journalists investigating Somali fraud and other fraud. I hope the Fed DOJ investigates and prosecutes you for civil rights violations. And it goes on to say you are a bunch of haters and even more colorful language there. But have we seen any indication that they are taking this seriously? I mean, you laid out, you've got an auditor saying we've looked at this and we're not going to investigate fraud. What about the feds? Are we seeing any indication that there's going to be some accountability to make sure, yes, these dollars that you're paying in taxes are going to a legitimate child care organization, or they're not going to a legitimate organization?
I mean, I think that that's going to be the big question. And the short answer is we don't know right now what actions are going to be taken. We do know that this involves federal tax dollars. And so that's what's going to create a very interesting situation if the federal government does decide to investigate and they discover that it's not just, a group of people committing fraud. They're being, again, this is just hypothetical, if they found that there were state officials that were actively aiding and abetting this fraud and then maybe pocketing some of the cash. Again, that's just a hypothetical of what they would find, because now they're not just going to be prosecuting Somalian daycare fraud. They're going to be investigating and prosecuting people within the state government potentially. And so that's if they decide to investigate, and that's if they find actual proof of that. But it does create a problem for the state when they say they don't want to investigate something that involves potential fraud of federal tax dollars that they're overpaying.
Millions and millions and hundreds of millions of federal tax dollars,
right,
not just in Washington, but all across the country. TJ Martinell, investigative reporter for the Center Square. Greatly appreciate your time. You can read more about that and find out more here each and every weekday, only with the States.